On this episode of the Athletic Potential Podcast, we will be discussing preseason as well as start of season injury rates in baseball and softball, as well as how to prevent UCL injury at the start of a season. Welcome to the Athletic Potential Podcast, your place to come and get answers to your athletic development questions. We cover a range of topics, all related to helping you to achieve your athletic goals so that you can experience and enjoy the athletic career that you deserve. I am your host, Dr. Mike Matthews. Hey everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Athletic Potential Podcast. We're seeing a theme of questions at this point as you'll be able to tell what season we're in regards to sports and specifically baseball and softball. We've had a lot of questions lately in regards to injury prevention and those type of things. And we're going to dive into a couple different questions that will answer a lot of these same questions that I get daily. But today we're going to be talking about injury prevention, but also about injury rates and things that we typically see at the start of a spring season, specifically for baseball and softball. Now, this can be applicable to volleyballers or anybody who's throwing or overhead hitting. We really should just lump in javelin throwers at this point. I feel like we've seen a few more javelin injuries at this point in regards to throwing. And so this is going to be an injury prevention podcast themed. And so we're excited. It's definitely something, and we'll get into this in the questions, but I definitely want to touch base with this right now. There's plenty of research out there suggesting, and we can even just look at injury trend data that exists in the Major League Baseball, but also in collegiate softball, if we want to pull softball data in, is that injury rates are the highest typically in the spring. Now, when we say in the spring, that means the start of the season, so the very more beginning of the season. And there's reasons for that, and we'll get into that in the questions. But that doesn't mean injuries don't happen mid-season, late season, or even further on than that. We seem to see an increase in these injuries in the beginning of the season. And what I want to cover and want everybody to get out of this episode today is a few things that can mitigate the risk of these injuries. Now, one of which you're going to hear a common theme, and unfortunately, the time has passed for any of these injury prevention or injury reduction strategies to work, but a lot of it has to do with a really good off-season and good training program during the off-season. So, but we're beyond that in regards to where we're at now, but that it will be something that I will talk about, and it will be something that I try to emphasize the importance of an off-season. You'll hear it in the questions. And so, all right, let's jump right into our questions. Our first question comes from Manny. Manny says or asks, what are your recommendations to best help prevent injury at the start of the season? I have heard that injuries are the highest at this time of year and would like to avoid any injuries of my kids. So you're a parent. I'm assuming this is baseball, softball, just because that's typically what we're talking about. So I'm assuming this is a baseball, softball type question. And this is a great question. This is something that we always ask ourselves as clinicians and rehab specialists and strength conditioning coaches and those things. We're always asking this question year round, but typically this is one of the main things that we look at every offseason, the start of the offseason, is what can we do now, 3 months, 4 months out of a season, that at the beginning of the season we will not see injury rates increase, or the athletes that we're working with will be at increased protection from these injuries. And so, great question, Manny. I can't tell you this, and I just alluded to it in the beginning, but I can tell you right now, one of the best things you can do to prevent injuries in early spring and at the start of the season is to have a really good off season. Now, something that's very much and very easily overlooked at this point is the fact that I said off season, meaning that you actually took time off from the sport. There are other sports. I just recently had a conversation with parents of a girls' soccer club here locally, and we talked about in-season training, and I told them, and they said, well, what about off-season training? And I looked at them all, and I go, I thought you guys didn't have an off-season. I thought you guys played year-round. And the answer was, well, they have 4 weeks where they really don't play a whole lot. And in my head, I'm like, 4 weeks is not very long. So, but the idea is that's just kind of the nature of the game. And so we have to adapt to that and to provide best case strategies if someone's going to be competing 11 of 12 months out of the year. Now, baseball players and softball players, I highly suggest you take way more time off than that, typically around 3 months or 4 months, play other sports type of season, or have an off season where you spend a lot of time getting strong, getting mobile, and getting everything essentially tuned up and as healthy as possible prior to the start of the season. That is probably your best strategy for preventing injuries in the spring. Now, we're in the spring. We're in the early spring. Seasons have started, tryouts have happened, and games are going to start or have started already. And so at this point, what I tell everybody is the next best thing you can do. Well, let me rewind actually. So we're not quite there yet. The idea is the next best thing you can do in regards to preventing injuries early season, spring season, is to actually have a plan for returning to throw. A lot of my patients or my clients that I see at this time of year, they'll come in with a lot of these overuse injuries, but they're not overuse because they haven't been throwing. What happens is that they overuse in a small time period and they haven't adequately ramped up or provided enough time for their bodies to be able to take the stress of throwing. And what we see are injuries. This is your little league shoulder, little league elbow. By the way, this would also include your elbow injuries and a flexor tendon mass strains, as well as your UCL injuries and tears. We see it in shoulders as well, as that there's a lot of stress with throwing, and we just haven't given the body enough time to adapt to throwing again, and you get back into it a little bit too quickly at too high intensities. And so a plan of when to start throwing, and then also once you have decided when you would start throwing, you would also have to then have a actual interval throwing program or some sort of throwing plan. And probably the hardest thing I've ever seen, or the part of this is people don't stick to their plan. They just go, hey, I feel pretty good. I'm going to let it eat today. And the answer is realistically, you're not there yet. And this is a conversation I have almost daily with all of the professional athletes, professional baseball players that are here in the off season. Is we're writing these programs. I'm typically helping and advising them in regards to their organization's throwing programs that are given to them. And they may have questions. They may be like, man, I'm feeling really good today. I'm gonna really see what I can do. And a lot of times I'm looking at them going, hey, it's November 30th. You don't need to be off a mound for, another 3, 4, or 5 weeks, depending on what your organization is asking you to do. Realistically, you really don't need to let this thing go right now. Now, that being said, I think it's important that they do try that thing, but realistically, you got to stick to a plan. Every one of our professional athletes that we work with here in the off season all had a throwing plan, interval throwing program of some sort, whether we designed it for them or their organization gave it to them. All of them had a plan, and all of them were very professional in the sense that they stuck to their plan. And I can tell you this, our goal for one of our professional athletes, professional baseball pitchers, I shouldn't say one, I'd say most of them was, most of them throw pretty hard, right? We're talking like low to mid, some of them upper 90s. And I tell them, like, look, I don't know if I should see an upper 90s fastball here at this time. One, because it's cold. Two, you don't need to be throwing upper 90s, at the end of January, early February, because I still think there's another couple weeks that they can ramp it up once they get back to spring training or down with their teams, either in Arizona or Florida. And so I'm a little shocked usually if I see that number, but what I always have in mind is a velocity number, essentially, that I would like to see each one of the pitchers throw prior to returning. Now, each one is individualized, and this year we had a lot of different pitchers in here, but of the ones that we spent the most time with, and even those that we didn't spend as much time with, they all hit their numbers right on time, meaning they were a little worried they weren't throwing hard enough, and in the last week or two they hit the numbers that we were hoping for, and they all felt great heading off to spring training. So stick to the plan is one of the biggest things we can see, is that most people get off plan, start throwing too hard too early, and then they either get fatigued and then they have to start playing games outside, and then they have problems with that. Realistically, if you have a plan, stick to the plan, own the plan, understand it, and stay with it. And then the next thing is more of a general concept, but realistically is a lot of people get all excited and as the start of the spring season hits, and they're like, oh yeah, let's go. We're going to do so much. We're going to get better. We're going to do really good with our arm care. We're going to be really good with throwing. We're going to be really good with hitting. We're going to be make sure we're hitting the weight room, all this kind of stuff. And I said, look, you need to change to a different mindset. And I tell most of the athletes here, I said, look, you're in season now. Your priority is not in the weight room. Your priority is not in the tunnels. Your priority isn't on the bullpen mounds here. Your priority is to go out in the field and perform and to do well for in the game. And I tell them you're beyond the mindset of increase and progression and getting strong and those type of things. And I said you kind of need to have a little bit more of a mindset of maintenance at this point. I don't know why I can't say the word maintenance without being kind of awkward about it, but maintenance, that's probably better. It's the first time I've ever been able to do that. Anyways, but the idea is if you have this mindset where you're just trying to maintain all the gains that you made up to this point, and if you can, that's actually a major win. We know in the Major League Baseball data that strength decreases over the course of the season, range of motion decreases over the course of the season, fatigue levels increase over the course of the season, which means endurance rates decrease over the course of the season. Realistically, and it's been said by someone smarter than me, and that is that their entire job as a rehab specialist or even a strength and conditioning coach for these professional athletes is to make sure that they get back to normal before their next outing or before their next game. That's their entire job. Normal is not necessarily improved. Normal is back to where they came in at and where they want them to stay at for as long as possible. And I like that mindset. I like that mindset in all of our athletes, but realistically, if you're in season, your goal is to go out and perform and to not lose any performance variables or performance measures and not see them decrease. Now, there are definitely athletes that we see that increase over the course of the season, but that's because they're in a great window of adaptation and they should be increasing at that time. But realistically, most of our athletes, we're looking for them to stay the same throughout the course of the season and maintain those higher levels of performance. Okay. So Manny, I hope that answers your question. It's pretty vague. Let me try to give it to you straight. Have a good off season. Have a plan of when to start throwing. Stick to your plan, and then have a mindset of maintenance as you go throughout the beginning of the season and definitely throughout the season. Okay. I hope that helps. This is a very big question with a lot of different answers, but I think for what we're trying to accomplish and the way I feel like you worded this question, Manny, I think that's probably the best answer I'm going to give to you. And then Manny, don't stop listening, because the next question is going to help you out in regards to maybe some things you can do right away. Now, by the way, I didn't talk about arm care. I didn't talk about any of these exercise programs. That's all included in an off-season program, but the maintenance program, yes, is part of this. You've got to maintain those shoulder muscles and the arm muscles and all those type of things. All of this is included in that maintenance program. So, Manny, keep listening with our next question here. So let's go ahead and transition to our next question. And this question is from Mike. Great name. Okay. Mike asks, what is the best way to improve forearm strength to protect the UCL from tearing? Real quick, for those that are listening, I'm assuming this is a baseball question. UCLs typically don't tear in softballers, but they can. But this is more of a baseball problem that we see, even though it does happen in softball. Okay, so here we go. We talk about UCL. It's a ligament that lives on the inside of the elbow, right in here. Its predominant job is as you go into layback or you go to throw. What happens is it gets stressed a lot, and what happens is it gets stressed enough that it ends up tearing. If you tear this ligament, you will not be a very successful baseball player. Now, that being said, I know there's anomalies, people out there that have done it. Realistically, you need this thing to throw. You need to throw hard, and if you don't have one, it needs to get fixed. That's Tommy John surgery. We've heard about that. There's also something out there called the UCL repair. It's shorter time frames to return. Both are great surgeries. Around 90% return back to the same level of play and same level of competition after these surgeries. They're great, but they are surgeries. They are no fun. We try to avoid these. So back to your question, Mike, what's the best way to improve forearm strength? Now, one of the components that decreases stress across the ligament in the elbow is the ability of the muscles of the forearm. Okay, this massive muscles kind of right here in that forearm. For those that can't see me that aren't watching, I'm just pointing to the inside of my elbow. If you flex your wrist and you get a fist, you'll feel your muscles in your forearm and the inside of your elbow kind of build up, and there's just kind of massive muscles. Okay, and that's called the flexor pronator mass. The entire job during a baseball pitch of a flexor pronator mass is to take stress on the inside of the elbow and essentially offload or decrease the stress that goes through the ligament, that UCL. Now, this is extremely important. Now, I'm going to get a little geeky on here, so I apologize, but they've done studies where they've taken cadaveric UCL, so essentially elbows from those that have passed on, and they're studying them, and they put them in a machine, and they stress their arms going backwards in the throwing motion, and they see how much force it takes for for that UCL to then tear. And they've been able to measure this, and they know about how much force it takes for just that ligament to take the stress and then eventually tear. And what they found was equivalent wise, the force of throwing at higher velocities, and I won't quote perfectly, but just understand the general concept here. Throwing at high velocities equals the amount of force it takes to tear the ligament on every throw. Okay, so that study indicated that every time somebody goes out and throws, let's just say 90 miles an hour, 90 plus miles an hour, that ligament is getting the same amount of stress, the stress or the strain across the inside of the elbow is the same. And essentially, if you didn't have this muscle group, you would tear your UCL, you tear that ligament with every throw. Okay. Now, that's a fair like a big time generalization. Doesn't really happen that perfectly, but it emphasizes the importance of the forearm muscles in regards to making sure that they are conditioned to handle throwing. Okay. Now, Manny, from the previous question, we talked about, how do you prevent injuries or how do these type of things. One of the number one injuries we see in baseballers is injuries or sprain strains of the UCL and the flexor pronator mass, respectively. Now, the best way to improve these the way to improve the forearm strength, those type of things. And Mike, I'm going to change the lanes on you a little bit here. Strength is only one component, and again, I'm getting a little semantical about this, but when you say strength, I'm going to assume that you mean a couple of things. One, how much force the muscle can produce, like how hard it can contract, okay? Two, how many times it can contract at high forces, so that's endurance, okay? So that's repetitions. Three, how fast it can actually produce force, meaning if I go to flex something, is it like a or is it more of a pop? Fast. That's what we call rate of force development. Okay, and when you're asking the way to improve forearm strength, I'm going to assume you mean all of those. Okay, and here's the deal: you have to train these muscles, and you have to do it in a very specific way. Now, let me just get you the three things that I think you need to know about this. There's three main muscles, actually four. Some people would argue six. I'm just going to tell you there's three that I like. Now, that being said, I target them all. Okay, but these three are important, and you'll see how these exercises line up. Okay, there's three muscles. There's a flexi carpi ulnaris. Okay, there's a flexor digitorum superficialis, and there's a flexor carpi radialis. They all come in here. Okay, you can try to type those out on Google. It'll help you. But if you get to see a picture of this, these muscles go right over the top of the UCL. They attach on the inside of the elbow. You can see that they are definitely in line with the ligament itself, and they protect the ligament during throwing. Okay. However, if you want to target those muscles specifically, or more specifically, you have to do select exercises to get this done. Okay. Now, let me go one at a time through the muscles, because Mike, I feel like you're looking for this kind of answer, and so I hope this answers it. Let's start with the first muscle, that flexor carpi ulnaris. That muscle does, and if you're watching, you can see this. It does this motion. Okay, what happens is I'm holding my arm up, my palm is facing me, my wrist is straight. Okay, And what I'm doing is trying to take my pinky down to this to the inside of my arm, okay, down. And that's called ulnar deviation, and that's one of the things that muscle, that flexor carpio-ulnaris, does. So when you exercise and try to target that muscle specifically, you have to do that ulnar deviation, okay? Now, Mike, before we get too crazy, and for everybody else listening, I will link these 3 exercises on the show notes. Okay. So just go there. You'll click a link. I believe it's a playlist on YouTube. You just watch them. Okay. There'll be other things. You'll see some interesting things there that we're doing, but realistically, I want everybody to kind of get this concept. Okay. Now, flexor carpio-ulnaris, we've got to do ulnar deviation. In the video, when you watch it, you'll see that we have a very specific tool that we use to make this happen. You can do this with a bat. You can do this with other things. Okay, there's a lot of things you can do with it, but I can tell you this, that the device that we have definitely is very effective, and you've got to do this in a certain way to really target this muscle. Okay, so first thing, we got that. That's one of the muscles, flexor carpio-ulnaris, ulnar deviation. Watch the video. Second one, flexor digitorum superficialis. Now, the name of the muscle tells you what it does. Flexor flexes. Digitorum, digits, that's your fingers. Okay. Superficialis just tells you where it's at. It's up on top. Okay. Now, its whole job is to flex the fingers. It makes a fist. That's what this muscle does. Now, when it makes a fist, there's one specific component to that, and that is you can train this muscle more specifically than what we call there's a deep muscle that does this as well, but it's a little different, is that the superficialis, the tendons, go all the way to the end of the fingertips. So if you were to hold your palm out straight and barely bend the fingers, okay, just the ends, just the very ends of your hand, you just bend those fingertips, that muscle is the flexor digitorum superficialis that's doing this. You'll see on that playlist that the player will be holding a kettlebell. He'll be slowly releasing the kettlebell all the way out to the very end of his fingers, and at which point he'll then pull it all the way back into a fist and flex his wrist. So we are targeting that flexor digitorum superficialis by extending the fingers all the way barely out to the very end and then back in. Okay, that's how you target that muscle. Now, that's the second muscle. Okay, third muscle, flexor carpi radialis. Its job is to flex the wrist, but it also does a little bit of pronation. Okay, so we're going to add pronation and supination. Now, pronation is literally if I hold my hand out like someone's going to hand me something and my palm's up, I reach my palm out. I'm in supination. My hand makes kind of a bowl shape. It's soup in a bowl, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I hold that up. That's supination. Okay, now if I turn my palm down now, that's pronation. Now, what we're going to do is use a hammer, a bat, whatever you've got. You'll see in the video, we've got, a specific device that we use that we then do pronation, supination. This is something that's done fairly common with most baseball players, okay? So we do pronation, supination, and do that for so many reps, okay? So that's how you target those 3 muscles. Now, the 4th, 5th, and 6th muscles, which we really won't get after, are actually all activated and used during these 3 exercises. So I actually don't target these other muscles any differently. I just use these 3, and they seem to get all of them. So, Mike, I hope that helps a little bit in regards to muscles, like how to improve strength in the forearm, these type of things. Now, remember, there's one other thing, and it's hard to get into detail on this, but at this point, you'll see in the video that we are targeting this with really going after strength. How much force can these muscles produce? I can tell you this: if you're an advanced level player, or if you're a coach at advanced level players, and when we say advanced level, this is your level. We're talking junior, seniors in high school, into college, and then professional. We also train these same muscles using the same movements, but in different ways, different sets and reps for endurance, okay? And then quick movements, those kind of things, ballistics to improve rate of force development, okay? So just know that if you're trying to target all of these, that's what is needed. Now, I will tell you this, Mike, if you want what we do with that, shoot me an email and let me know, okay? My email is mike@athletic-potential.com. By the way, if anybody else wants it, just, hey, Mike, I would like the additional sets and reps to improve endurance and rate of force development, okay? And I'll try and send that out, or I'll even post it if it becomes a big deal. And we got a lot of those questions from everybody that are requesting for that. Okay, those are, in my opinion, the top three. These muscles or these exercises are done by all of our athletes that are throwers, because I feel like this is the best thing we can do to try to help protect the elbow, outside of improving everything else, including shoulder strength and health and posture and core control and proper range of motion and all those other things that are also very important for elbow health in the thrower. But directly, and Mike, you're asking forearm strength. So you're talking specifically about the forearm. I wanted to make sure I addressed what we specifically do for the forearm. Okay. Now, the other thing that I will tell you that we also do that I feel like is fairly effective is carries, right? So we talked about this. If you listen to the podcast at all, you've heard me talk about loaded carries. You're picking up weights and you're carrying them for a distance. Okay. This would be an endurance type scenario. In the throwing motion, it is predominantly an isometric contraction, meaning you're flexing and holding the ball. Okay. In this position, you're not doing a ton of this, and there's not a lot of like movements. Now, you do it on curveballs and all that kind of stuff, and you pronate with the change-ups. I get that, but realistically, as your arm comes through the path, it's a grip where we're talking about isometrics about the elbow and in the forearm. So I like carries because they develop grip strength, but they also develop endurance, and they're an easy thing. They're super safe. It's hard to mess up a carry unless you're fooling around. But realistically, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy carries for a lot of our athletes. Now, that being said, we still target these muscles very specifically because carries will only get a part of the picture. So, Mike, I hope that answers your question. I can tell you right now, this is how we rehab guys with strains and sprains of the muscle and ligament, guys that have had surgery, Tommy John, those type of things. We spend an extensive amount of time trying to get these muscles back to their original shape. We look at muscle activation through EMG. We target it with integrated neuromuscular stimulation type things. That if you've never heard of that, you can Google that. But realistically, there's some really good things that are coming out that we really need to improve the brain muscle connection that just doesn't seem to happen after surgeries. That's something that we've been heavily using now, and it seems to be working. And we've seen a substantial improvement in our results with the clients that work with us here. That would be something else. But realistically, Mike, get going on these exercises. I understand that these are important. It's best done in the off season and then maintained throughout the course of a season. We've already talked about that. But Mike, that's where I'd go with this. Okay. And I hope that helps. But yeah, reach out with the email if you want any more specifics. I really don't want to see. I really don't want to see clients come in injured. In an ideal world, I'd probably have to find a new job. Nobody would get injured, but injuries happen. That's how it works, and we're here to help. But I would love, and rather have our athletes coming in for strength conditioning and all these other type of preventative measures before a season, get really good, really strong, really mobile, everything that needs to be done, and never see them in here for rehabilitation from an injury. But it's not how it works, and sometimes you just got to get through it. But do these things, and I think you're going to notice a positive improvement in regards to your ability to stay healthy and stay on the field and keep playing. So, all right, that does it for this week's episode. Again, more of an injury prevention type episode, but realistically good information, stuff that I always talk about, and it's something that we are always programming for. So I hope this helps for those that are listening. If you are listening, please go to the Apple Podcasts and rate and review the podcasts. Help us out, get in front of more people. If you have questions, please ask them, and then spread the word. And we appreciate your time and taking it to listen to this podcast, and hopefully provide good information. And we will catch you next time. Thanks. Hey everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Athletic Potential Podcast. If you do have questions for the podcast, please visit the website www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. You'll find a button there to ask your question. Please input your information and your question, and we will answer any and all questions we get. And thank you again for listening. If you do get a chance, please rate and review the podcast. And until next time, thanks.